Fox News alert frustration and disbelief at these new hearings into the IRS's targeting of conservative groups, as the IRS official at the center of the controversy appears before Congress for the first time since the scandal broke and refuses to answer any questions based on the Fifth Amendment. Brand new hour here of America Live. Welcome, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. Lois Lerner is the director of the unit that is responsible for singling out conservative groups for scrutiny and long delays of their applications for tax-exempt status, as you heard in our last segment. Today, she insisted she did nothing wrong, and then she refused to say any more. That did not go over well with some lawmakers.
I have not done anything wrong. I have not broken any laws. I have not violated any IRS rules or regulations, and I have not provided false information to this or any other congressional committee. I've been advised by my counsel to assert my constitutional right not to testify or answer questions related to the subject matter of this hearing. After very careful consideration, I've decided to follow my counsel's advice and not testify or answer any of the questions today.
Mr. Cummings just said we should run this like a courtroom, and I agree with him. She just testified. She just waived her Fifth Amendment right to privilege. You don't get to tell your side of the story and then not be subjected to cross-examination. That's not the way it works. She waived her right to Fifth Amendment privilege by issuing an opening statement. She ought to stand here and answer our questions.
The gentlelady who has departed was entitled to assert her Fifth Amendment. Although there's some questions about how it was done, there can be no question that we have to respect it. Additionally, that her assertion is not to be viewed or used during this hearing to make any determination plus or minus as to actions that were taken.
Some heated moments on Capitol Hill today, and our chief congressional correspondent Mike Emanuel has the very latest now on these ongoing hearings. Mike?
Well, Megyn, many lawmakers have been asking who outside the IRS was aware of this targeting and when. Neil Wolin, the number 2 at the Treasury Department, says he was told last year that the Inspector General was going to take a look at the possibility of targeting, but Wolin says he didn't know the details until about 10 days ago and offered this assessment.
There is no indication that Treasury was involved in the inexcusable behavior at the IRS, and Treasury only learned of the fact that the IG was conducting a review after the unacceptable conduct had already ended.
Lawmakers are trying to figure out who's responsible for targeting conservative organizations seeking tax-exempt status. The catalyst of all of this, one key Republican went after the former IRS commissioner about his 118 visits to the White House and if Douglas Shulman discussed IRS targeting there.
You sure you didn't talk to anyone at the White House about this issue, Mr. Shulman?
About singling out conservative groups for special scrutiny?
Well, that's what we're talking about, isn't it?
I'm absolutely sure I did not talk to anyone.
118 visits. It didn't come up in a casual conversation after 132 members of Congress contacted you about it. You sure you didn't bring it up with anybody at the White House?
Not to my memory, and it wouldn't be appropriate. And so I certainly believe I did not have any conversations.
Let's take a live look at the hearing, which is now 4.5 hours old, being led by Chairman Darrell Issa in the House Oversight Committee. The IRS has told Congress it conducted its own internal review a year ago, which revealed a substantial bias against conservative groups. But a House Oversight Committee aide says it does not appear that any IRS employees were punished at that point. Megyn?
Right. Virtually everyone still has their job. Mike, thanks.
Thank you.
For more on this now, I'm joined by Michael Mukasey, former U.S. Attorney General under President George W. Bush. So let's start with Ms. Lerner. You and I agreed before the show started that had we been advising her, we probably would have told her to plead the Fifth as well, because
Absolutely.
There have been open threats of criminal prosecution in the case. And yet, how do we get Ms. Lerner to offer us a full and true accounting of what went down at the IRS?
Well, I suppose she could be invited in to give a proffer, an off-the-record proffer to counsel of what she would say if she were given immunity. If she's then given immunity, meaning that what she says can't be used against her, then she could be compelled to testify. If she refuses to give a proffer, I suppose they could simply confer immunity on her, and she would then have to testify.
Then that removes her ability to assert the Fifth Amendment right?
Correct, because nothing she said could be used to incriminate her.
Now that's interesting, because what we've had with Ms. Lerner is repeated appearance before these committees on Capitol Hill and she has said nothing. Even when questioned on this subject matter, she's failed to disclose repeatedly to these lawmakers. So it's just one of the reasons why they're so ticked off at her. Now, finally, they reveal in an IG report that she was doing, her agency was doing all the stuff they thought that they were doing. And it's Fifth Amendment, I'm not going to tell you anything. They can't get any of the people who have come out to name names. The one guy, Miller, said, well, maybe I'll do it off camera, but I'm not going to do it on. What? Why don't we have a right to know who did this and who orchestrated it?
Well, Congress has an oversight authority and responsibility, and they would exercise it on camera, off camera, whatever, in camera if necessary. And they can certainly confer immunity on people who need it. If she needs immunity, she can get it. This may be a bigger political question than it is a criminal question, and so they may want to resolve it that way.
What do you make of some folks calling for a special prosecutor? Because I've heard this is not breaking down along party lines. Some Republicans think it's a bad idea. Some Democrats think it's a good idea. It's not clear to me where the wisdom is in it.
Yeah, I think it's a lousy idea for two reasons. First of all, I've never been a fan of special prosecutors, and particularly under the current system. Special prosecutors are not independent of the executive. They can't be constitutionally.
So if we had one appointed, they would answer to Eric Holder?
They would answer to the president, yes.
President.
They would answer to they may not have to adhere to procedures within the Justice Department, but ultimately they would answer to the president. He has the executive authority. So the notion that somehow they've got some sort of independence is an illusion and a myth.
So the way to handle this, in your view, is to let these congressional hearings play out?
Yes.
Because it's a political matter as much as a legal matter, and DOJ is doing its investigation.
Right. And ironically, if you decide to have a criminal investigation, I would think that perhaps the proper entity to investigate it is the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department, which, as you know, has been charged with politicizing the way it enforces the law and would have an excellent opportunity to redeem itself and get out from under those charges if it were to conduct an impartial investigation.
What about, let's switch gears and talk about the Associated Press and James Rosen, and this now, twice in 2 weeks, reports that the DOJ, Eric Holder, has gone in there and gotten reporters' phone records, in some instances cell phone records. We believe James Rosen's parents' records, their phone records, and both times it was an egregious national security leak, and we had to do it without notice. No notice to the other side and the chance to object. Your thoughts on it?
Well, there are two separate cases. Let's start with the AP. There are regulations in the Code of Federal Regulations and within the U.S. Attorney's Manual on how the Justice Department is supposed to approach getting telephone records of reporters. For one thing, they're supposed to exhaust other remedies, other methods of investigation before they resort to that. Secondly, they are supposed to frame the subpoena as narrowly as possible. And third, they are supposed to negotiate with the news entity involved or the reporter involved unless doing so would compromise the investigation.
That's their assertion.
That's their assertion. Back it up, because I can't see how it would. The investigation with respect to Fox had to do with a
State Department leaker who was speaking to James Rosen.
With the AP.
Okay.
Let's stick to the AP for a minute. With the AP, it had to do with a leak about a confidential operation within the CIA in which they foiled a plot to put a bomb aboard an airliner. The plot was over, and the person, as I gather, was out already. So the question, I suppose, is whether that person could have continued to function or not. If the person could not have continued to function, then there really wasn't any national security issue left. But they nonetheless proceeded to try to get...
Let me ask you this. As somebody who used to hold this post, and I know you have another point to make, but we're running out of time. But how big a deal is it in the Department of Justice? When you were there, how big a deal was it to go after the records, the phone, home phone, cell phone, possibly parental phone, internal Fox News phone, or other phone records of journalists covering the administration? Well,
the closest, the fact is I never did anything like that. The closest I came was trying to get a subpoena a reporter for a grand jury investigation. And it was very, very difficult. We were very circumspect. We had to negotiate with the reporter. We had to negotiate with the entity that he worked for. We had to negotiate with his lawyers, obviously, and it didn't get done within the time that I was there. It is a very delicate procedure, and everybody there knows it.
And quickly, what do you make of the separate case of them looking into, suggesting James Rosen is a criminal for doing his job as a reporter and seeking out information from a source.
That one's incredible. And what is even more incredible to me is they actually got a judicial officer to sign that warrant. They went to a magistrate judge. Now, these are kind of JV judges, if you will. They're not Article III judges. They're appointed by the court, and they have jurisdiction to grant search warrants. But he signed a search warrant based on representations that didn't justify it. The affidavit showed that they already knew who the leaker was. They didn't need information.
Right. That one they had already identified. That guy is now being prosecuted, but
it's
they
all
already
over the
knew.
affidavit. They didn't need it. And yet a warrant was signed.
Why would they do that? I mean, what is going on here?
I'm not clinically trained, so I can't get inside their minds.
But you've held the post, General. I mean, this is a serious...
This is about... Look,
that is a serious obligation you take on when you become the Attorney General of the United States.
This looks to be about controlling the flow of information. If you make it difficult for reporters to gather information, you make it hazardous for people to disclose information, then necessarily the only information that gets out is the information that comes from the government. And that's not the way it ought to be.
Former Attorney General Michael Mukasey, thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Great to see you.